Hi. Thanks for being here. This is the second time John's read at the gallery since we opened.
That's right.
So it's great to have him back. Without further ado, what's really cool is Andy Kay is here tonight to enter into this dialogue and conversation with John. And I'm going to just give a little background on Andy. Andy is the author of 6 nonfiction books, including the bestseller, Life's a Bitch, and Then You Change Your Careers. And you change careers. For 30 years, she gave kick in the butt career advice to syndicated newspaper columns on TV and radio and one-on-one, helping people get off their duff and out of their funk into a more fulfilling future. She's doing that for John tonight.
Depends on how book sales go.
Yeah. She took her own career advice and turned to a second/side career as an artist in her full-time endeavor. And you can see her work all over town. She does these beautiful, mostly bird images, both 2D and 3D. I'm ad-libbing here, but they're really pretty, beautiful creations. And she shows a number of galleries around town. She took her own, so she's been doing that, and it's mostly in paper, right?
Yeah, it's all paper.
And tonight she's going to facilitate this conversation with John. His new book, Getting Huge, in whose main character is in a major career funk. And he can't get out of his own way in more ways than one. So I think that's going to be, an interesting dialogue between the two of you. I've known John since we were little boys.
19.
Since we were 19.
I'm actually smaller now.
So I didn't know him when he was 8 years old, and he told his mom he wanted to be a scientist or a clown, so he went into advertising. And he feels like he achieved his goals. Along the way, he left his Hoosier background or Hoosier home state and lived in Boston, where we know each other for many, many years. And graduated from IU, scooped up an MFA at Emerson College in Boston. He's also taught English at the college and high school levels. He's one of the hardest working men I know. He's relentless in his pursuit of his craft, so you're all going to get the benefit of that tonight.
Well, thank you.
And in addition to his new book, Getting Huge,
those are ad-libs, by the way.
And in addition to this book, Getting Huge, he also has Fire in the Field, which is a series of short stories, and When the Coin is in the Air, which is another novel. He lives with his wonderful wife, Lauren, who's back there, and his 2 children here in Cincinnati. And with that, I will leave the set.
Thanks, Paulie. Well, thank you all for coming. And because of Andy's... Thanks. My brother's booing me in the front row here. Because of Andy's extensive background as a career coach, we talked about it and said, well, and the career crisis the character John Crackstone is under, we're going to kind of look at the book through that lens tonight and talk about it that way. So Andy, you want to kick us off in terms of a discussion?
Okay, thanks, John, and thank you all for coming. We're going to just real quickly, we'll talk, John and I, for about a half hour, and then we'll open it up for questions, okay? Okay. So this is your 3rd book within 3 years, right?
Longer than that. The first was in 2019, then 19, 21, and now 23.
Okay. I read it in very quickly, 6 days, and loved it. I really did. It was hilarious. It was serious, but it was very playful about a very serious subject and subjects. There's lots to cover. It's a lot more than about a guy who wants to create the biggest pumpkin the world has ever seen. And it's about a lot more than a guy who wants to create an empire of pumpkin products.
Right.
I have to put my glasses on to see my notes. So it felt to me like a career consulting session, in fact, because of the subjects that you cover. And some of those things that stood out for me were things that come out in career consulting sessions, which are dreams. Oh, I'm dreaming about doing this or that. Fantasy, people fantasize about all these things. Fear, temptation, obsession, wanting a more purposeful job or life's work, but being torn between that and the security that everybody still wants as well. And that feeling of not feeling good enough. All of those were themes that came through for me. And the flawed thinking, like, if I could just do this one thing, I'm gonna be happy. Yeah. I'm gonna be rich and the world is gonna love me. So those were some of the things that came out. Yeah. So this protagonist, John, thinks he's gonna grow happy building or growing pumpkins, and even says, in pumpkins lays my shot at greatness.
Right. John Crackstone, not this John.
Yeah, different John, different John. But I have to say, as I'm reading, I'm thinking, does John really think this? The whole time I'm reading this book. I think one does that, you know, when they're reading an author. Okay, so let's talk about him, John Crackstone, minister at a church in
Concord,
New Hampshire.
Massachusetts.
Oh, why did I think it was New Hampshire? Okay.
Well, previously he was in New Hampshire.
Okay.
His father was a prestigious minister here in Concord, Massachusetts. John had been up in a little town called Worthington, New Hampshire, and his father came to see him and says, I'm retiring, I want you to take over my church. And everybody says, you have to take this job. It's like the most prestigious church in the Congregationalist network of churches. And so John Crackstone grew up in Concord. He hates Concord. He's 6 feet 11 inches tall in socks, right? 7 feet in shoes, he says. And, you know, he just had a hard time. He was always kind of an awkward kid, hated sports. Everybody it's like, you better play basketball if you're that tall, right? But he didn't like basketball. And so he's being dragged back to his community. And he's coming back to Concord. And we meet him after he's been there for 12 years. We meet him Easter morning. And the first sentence of the novel is, my deacons saw Easter as a business opportunity. And you know you've got a potential conflict here when the minister is reporting that to you in the first sentence. And they've set before him a BHAG. You may know that business term, a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And that big, hairy, audacious goal before him is to break his father's record-setting Easter take. And he wakes up in the morning and he looks out the window and it's snowing. Heavy, wet, sleety snow, right? So he knows that the BHAG is dead as soon as he's awake. So that's how the novel begins.
And he is feeling his whole life, in fact, because of his height and other things, he's a misfit in the world, but in particular in Concord.
Yes.
Concord.
Yes.
Okay.
And Concord, just for a brief thing on Concord, it's this beautiful, picturesque village, and it's very historic, and it looks historic because of the very rigid regulations in the town. You have to have a white house with black shutters. If you want a fence, it can only be one of these 3 types of material, and the fence has to be only this size, and the pickets have to be this far apart. It's like, you know, it's like the planning board must go around with rulers, you know. And so it's this beautiful place, but it's also a little Disney-fied, you know. They're really preserving that sort of historic sense.
Okay, so my first question is, why a minister? Why not a chiropractor? Why did you make him a minister? That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, it's not a religious book, but
yeah.
I chose a minister. I've known several ministers, and one of my best friends is a rabbi, and they feel like they're living in a fishbowl, you know? They feel looked upon, they feel judged, they feel like people are watching for them to do something that is in some way hypocritical, or, you know, that misrepresents their church or their temple. And so there's that. So why would John Crackstone, the guy who describes himself as
the gawky, gangly kid who was either in the way or never there when you need him, who was so conscious, self-conscious. Why would he follow his father's footsteps and put him in this spotlight where everybody is judging you constantly?
I think that's a fair question, and I think it's a question John's been struggling with from the moment he was asked. His father offers it to him, and he's immediately fear-stricken. He doesn't really want the job, but everyone expects him to do it, and he feels obligated. His father, is this kind of bigger-than-life force, even though he's only 6'4". But a mere 6'4", Greg. And so, he just feels like he has to take it. Even his mentor is sort of like, you kind of can't say no to this job.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to get into that more.
Okay.
Okay. So unhappiness at work is what he pretty much introduces to us as the reader early on. Misfit, I don't like the job, I don't like the town, nothing about anything is working. And I guess one of the things that I wondered about was, do you think he was suited for the job? I know he didn't like the people, he didn't like the environment, the values were in conflict.
Yeah.
But what about the actual job? Was he good at that?
Well, I think a minister's job is so much part of their daily life. It's kind of a 24-hour day job. Mm-hmm. You're kind of always on. And I think that, that the pressures of that, I don't think he knew exactly what he was stepping into fully. Mm-hmm. He didn't really want the job, but I think it was harder on him than he anticipated.
Okay. One of the influences, now we'll get back to the dad here a second. One of the influences that I think, and in this case, sow confusion and chaos in people's minds about their career are the weight of the family, the expectations. Yeah. Why don't you read a little bit about that?
Sure. So in addition to him having this, father, there's also a longer family history that he also feels obligated to the state of Massachusetts because of this family. Adding to my father's considerable shadow stretched the long history of crackstones in America. We crackstones sailed over on the Mayflower, literally. And we've been here in New England ever since. My namesake, John Crackstone, was on the Mayflower with his son, also named John Crackstone. The elder died the first winter of 1621. His son died 6 years later. That might have been the end of Crackstones in America, but for my direct line, multi-great-grandfather, William Crackstone, younger brother to the elder John. He landed in Salem, Massachusetts in 1625. Because of our link to the brother and not a direct descendant, my father was snubbed by the General Society of Mayflower Descendants, the GSMD, also known to some on the South Shore as the Pompous Asses Club. Anyway, he was a man of action, this William Crackstone of the 17th century, and he helped settle Beverly, Massachusetts, just across the Salem Harbor in 1626, and died at the age of 82. You can still see his gray slate headstone in the old cemetery behind the police station in Beverly. It was after this man of action, this William, that my father was named. Our ancestry connects to the Commonwealth beyond the curious name Crackstone. We are also related to Richard Mather, who founded New England Congregationalism, which was carried on by his son, Increase Mather. Increase was his real name. Increase's son, Reverend Cotton Mather, took a hard right turn, a Puritan turn, and became a driving force for evil in the Salem witch trials, a topic which we Crackstones don't bring up at parties. So a little more about that family pressure.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so this guy's quite the dreamer. I talked a little bit about people having ideas and dreams, so he's got big dreams. Was it the right dream?
It's interesting. Well, it's funny. I think it has, even though I made it up, and I've never grown a pumpkin in my life, but I was having coffee with a friend of mine who's a minister, a different friend, and he was saying, we were talking about like being a minister, being a teacher, and how you do all this work. Lou, you know this feeling probably. You do all this work as a teacher, and you're planting all these seeds, and you don't really know if it's ever going to yield something. You kind of hope, but you don't really know. And we were talking about this topic, and he said, sometimes I just want to go dig up my backyard and plant a garden so I can watch the plants grow. And I was like, dude, that's what happens in the book. I just sold to Guernica, So it was like, that became a whole new conversation about that. But I do think it has its roots in that idea of finding something tangible results. And that's part of what drives John Crackstone. And his obsession, in a way, because of this sort of continuing stumbling effect, he's like, I've got to find success somewhere. And he says, as you mentioned, this is maybe my shot at greatness.
And the seeds felt to me like they became his little babies, and they were responding to him, which he doesn't really feel he gets anywhere else in his life, with his kids, with his wife, right, with his parish. And these little guys are growing, yeah. and he felt like he was important. There was something really important about making them come to life.
Yes, and when 11 of them disappear after the first day, he's shattered. He actually says a prayer for the 11 that have vanished overnight. He just can't imagine how this happened.
You just reminded me of the most painful moment in the book, and you warn the reader. You know what?
I'm not sure what you're going to say. No. I'm not.
You know where I'm talking. You don't know where I'm talking about? Where he has to cut some of them.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was so upsetting. I'm still upset about it. I felt their pain.
Yeah, he is laying there one night thinking about what he can do to further amplify the success, and he's thinking. It dawns on him that these pumpkins are fighting for the nutrients that he's providing. And he gets up and he says, I've got to sacrifice some so that the power of each vine can fuel just one giant. And so he has to clear out these pumpkins, and he refers to himself as like an old stone savage armed, which I stole from Robert Frost. But he wades into the pumpkin patch with his rusty machete, and he's hacking away at the lesser. And then he goes back to bed, and then he wakes up again at like 4 a.m. and realizes, I was a gutless wanderer out there. I have to go down and cut more of them out. And so he chops away more, leaving only 8 really big ones to grow.
He's never been that brave before.
No, that's probably right.
That was one of the bravest moments that I ever felt from that character. That was incredible. Really was. Okay, so let's talk about the thrill of the new, which you refer to it as in the book, and actually it came to my mind as you were talking about the career, but also this relationship that he kind of toys with, his neighbor, Carol, who is the wife of one of his deacons.
Yes.
And I was thinking about how the thrill of the new can lead us or mislead us. And I'm wondering what you think it was for him. Did it lead or mislead him?
Well, I think it was a kind of transference. So I think he was suffering and again, trying to find some sort of success. And he's thinking, I have to do something I haven't done. And so it drives him to think of, the pumpkins, and then he, for the first time, really notices the beautiful woman living next door. I mean, he really notices her, and smells her through his cathedral-like nose on his face. And so it's like he takes her in. He says, even though he has a huge nose, he doesn't have a good sense of smell, but her perfume rises to him and lingers, and kind of, he starts rolling downhill with her, imagines her.
So it misleads him a little bit in that sense, and possibly, I don't want to give it away, but possibly in his choice of new careers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's kind of absurd that someone wants to become build a pumpkin empire, and he gets kind of out of control with how he regards his efforts at that.
I didn't think it was so absurd. That's what cracked me up the whole time I'm reading this. I'm thinking, I could see that. I could see.
Well, it had to be just plausible enough, right, to keep a reader in there. So
Yeah.
it couldn't be so absurd that it's totally crazy. So when he starts revealing, like he does his research and he finds out how much seeds can sell for, and then he's like, holy cow, I could actually do this thing that I think I'm actually getting good at, and I can make a living at it maybe, and it sort of feeds on itself.
Yeah, and he's going to grow the biggest pumpkin. He's going to break the record with Schwartz. He names his pumpkin Schwartz. And that's going to give him $33,000 or something?
Yes, well, if he thinks if he wins the world record, he gets a big prize, and then he gets additional money for every pound that he breaks the world record by. And then he sees selling the seeds of the world's largest pumpkin ever are very valuable. In fact, in real life, and he doesn't go quite this far in the book, but in real life, last year's world record setter, each seed was $400. Wow. So, yeah, it's kind of like those people who get obsessed by orchids, right? It's that kind of energy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I want to tell more about these giant
sure.
pumpkins. So the root of this story comes from Lauren and I went to the Tops Field Fair, which is the oldest fair in America, just north of Boston. And we were there, just happened to be there on the day of the giant pumpkin weigh-in. And I grew up near a pumpkin farm in Indiana, and there were, McVeigh's farm, right? They always had their big giant pumpkin patch, but I'd never seen anything like these. I mean, these were so big an adult person could sit inside of them. These are huge pumpkins, and they keep getting bigger. I mean, last year's new world record holder was just under 3,000 pounds. So you think about it, that's the weight of a Mini Cooper, it's bigger than a Mini Cooper. And the whole size of them is not much smaller. So, and it's becoming this weird obsession. More and more people are doing it, so they keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, only you would come up with this.
So I carried that around in my head because, the initial shock of seeing them the first time, I was like, then after I looked at them for a while and the shock wore off, it was like, but who does this? And why? What compels someone to spend 6 or so months tending a gigantic pumpkin like this? And this is sort of my very slow cooked answer to that question.
Okay, I want you to read, I'll just set it up real quickly, pages 1 to 11 to the top. You're at lunch, John, the character, is at lunch with Carol, the woman who's married to Jack, and they're talking.
To Matt, married to Matt.
Oh, excuse me, Matt. And at this moment, prior to this, the character has told this woman, Carol, how he's not really loving his job, and he talks out loud to us as the reader about how unimportant he is, and how Matt is a really important guy. So.
Yeah, Matt's this handsome young guy who he perceives as, the high school quarterback grown up, Harvard Law, all that jazz. And he's very successful, and he wears beautiful suits and drives a nice big SUV with leather seats. And meanwhile, our narrator is driving a 14-year-old Ford Taurus. But they're at the restaurant together. And they're having this is their first lunch together, so he's pretty jazzed about being with this beautiful woman, and they go to Cambridge. And she says, she's told him some things about their life and about her husband's sort of sense of dissatisfaction. And the narrator says, seems like Matt has plenty to be happy about, I said. You'd think, but he's not? I don't know, she paused again. I know some things, and some I don't. I was about to ask what she meant, but I sensed she just needed to circle the thought before taking it up again. I drank my tea, crunched a chip with salsa, wiped my mouth, another tea. He's jealous of your life, John. In a bad movie or TV show, I'd do a spit take right then, spraying the table in lovely Carol with tea. Instead, I swallowed hard. What? He is. He envies your conviction, your calling to do God's work, the opportunity to help people, to be a key figure in the community, all of it. How could it be a man who appeared to have everything could possibly want what I had? The handsome man with the gorgeous wife, the man with a power job and his whopping salary, the stylish suits, the SUV with leather seats, the fine home. And did he really think what I did was God's work? I had once. I'm sorry, did I? I had once. Back in Worthington I did. Back when Reverend Crackstone didn't have an ironic sting to it.
Okay, this is the point in the book where I wanted to jump into the book and be in front of this guy and to say, what? You don't get that? Why aren't you changing your thinking? Why aren't you hearing what she says? He doesn't seem to get it.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem to get that the other guy, what the other guy feels about it. There's no recognition of it.
Right, he can't accept it. And he also is kind of losing the skill of listening, which is, of course, the stock and trade for a good minister, right?
Yes.
And we see this multiple times where someone will say something to him, and then he replays what he heard, and we're going, no, that's not what she said. That's not what he said. And that's again part of his sort of breaking. He's under a lot of stress, and so it's part of his dream that's getting out of hand.
Yeah, I was really upset with him that he didn't.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So another thing that struck me, people like to but people tend to hold on to what they have, even if it's not good, even if it's holding them back, and they are stuck. And there was a part on page 174 where I want you to read that, where he talks about that. And then I have a question.
See if I can.
The last paragraph on 174.
Okay. Over the previous year, maybe 2 years, certainly before the pumpkins, I'd been a dour soul around home, unhappy in my work, and as a minister, your work is really your life, so I was unhappy in my life. I was afraid, terrified, of what my unhappiness meant. It might force a major change, a career move, a move to another place, or I might get fired for subpar fundraising. And I had no idea what I'd do next. I clung to the job like a life raft, while also aching to escape. Of course, clinging to the raft kept me in the rapids. Maybe I needed to get out of the water, dry off, and then decide if I wanted back in, right?
What does he get? What does he gain from staying there? What does he get from that, from not moving forward?
Yeah, I think there is sort of the security of the job, the financial security. His wife doesn't say a whole lot about it, but we see that she is concerned about health insurance and having some security, and they've got 2 children, and there's that to think about. And then there's also the expectation around, of others, his family, especially his father, but also the deacons who, at one point he says, they were my father's deacons. I'm in my father's church. It all feels like it belongs to Dad. And so he feels that pressure. So I think that's what he gets. It's not enough, but and that's why he's struggling.
So does that mean he has financial security, but what's the other security? What does he gain?
I think it's part of the protection of his role in the family, of taking over what his father built.
The legacy.
Yeah, the legacy piece.
Okay. one of the points that, or one of the things that I've always noticed with people who are unhappy in their careers is that it leads to other questions about their life. And one of the things is family, because who you are at work comes back at home and acts out among your family. So will you read that part on 77 where you talk about that realization, that inkling that you're starting to get that,
Yeah, this is one of the things he's struggling with himself, because he doesn't want to be what he sort of feels like he's becoming. At home, it wasn't my proclivity to be distant from my children, and yet I wrestled with how much to let them in and how to connect. Should I really let my children know me? Could they? And can a child know his or her parents before they are also adults? Even then, I don't know.
that really struck me, the whole thing about should I let my children know who I am? Did he?
I don't think he really does.
Yeah,
I don't think he does.
I didn't think he does either.
Yeah, not until very late in the book, maybe.
I think that's his next
His
thing.
next journal.
The next journey, yeah, is the family. And because that really struck me, that question of letting your children know who you are. I don't know. Do your kids know who you are? Do you let them know who you are?
Gosh, they're not here to ask. Oh, gosh, speak of the devil, one of them just walked in. But no, so it really was. I was like, it's incredible. I look up. No, I mean, I think so. I don't think I was withholding, but I think it is hard for any kid to really know their parent.
Yeah.
I mean, you see them, but you don't see so much of them, and you don't understand so much of what's happening.
And your kids don't know how you are can be representative of how you feel about your work.
That's right, too.
You know?
I think, yeah.
So,
yeah, and how you're reacting to things in the family can be so often driven by what's happening in your work life.
Yeah, so it was spilling out all over.
Yeah, and I think it's especially hard in his position because he's sort of always on. He feels that weight, that pressure all the time.
Yeah. I loved your fretting. This guy frets like crazy. And he fantasizes. He's so human. One of my I think I told you about this. If not, yeah, I think I did. I love his fantasy at the bottom of 173, this last paragraph.
Do you want me to read that?
Yeah. Will you read that? Last graph.
Okay.
He's at the airport.
Yes, he's at the airport. He's flying to see his father, and one of the reasons he's going to see his father, well, a couple of things. He's partnering up with an old friend of his who's a successful entrepreneur, and his friend has said, for us to really be viable partners, you have to address a couple of things, and one of them is your father. And he jokingly says, Father with a capital F, our Father who art in heaven, or my dad. And he says, well, you may have some confusion around those two things. And he says, so you need to go resolve some of this old man issues. And then his friend says, we both have to make a contribution to this enterprise. And so he says, you need to put in 60 grand to get started. And so he's got to go ask the old man if he can borrow $60,000. He's in the airport getting ready to make this trip. And so to distract myself, I pulled out my fine glossy magazines and flipped through the stories about successful businesses, tales of rags to riches entrepreneurs, even a couple rags to riches and back to rags, with advice on funding your startup, with insights on technology, with ways to avoid the pitfalls of small business, including why you should never hire your spouse. A tidbit which I took to heart. With every page, I grew more excited. I could do this. They could interview me one day. They'd love the story of a wild-haired giraffe who pioneered an industry of growing pumpkins, the former minister who discovered his soul, his true calling, in a backyard pumpkin patch.
That was one of many of his fantasies.
Yes.
That one I love. How about some obsessions? Do you have a few obsessions you can read about?
Sure, I'll read a few pieces from his sort of pumpkin life. So as he's growing these pumpkins and after they're starting to take hold, he's been doing all this research on, fertilizers and all this horticultural research, which, kind of the librarians don't really know what to make of him at the library down the street because they're used to his, reading philosophers and so forth. But here he is. I fed them a special fertilizer, a secret potion of my own design, and poured it over my plants at noon each day. This concoction combined the best of the published secrets as well as a twist or two of my own. My growth potion consisted of milk, aged cow dung, a peeled banana, eggs with shell, a scoop of sugar, 2 teaspoons of fish food, and clippings of human hair. Into the food processor these items went to form a creamy, verdant-colored soup that had a fecund smell, both sweet and sour, an odor that more than once nearly drew my lips to the edge for a taste. It started. And now, as the pumpkins have progressed a little farther, with the pumpkins, something new and full of promise filled my life. Under my care bloomed measurable change, growth, improvement. I know these are grand words for pumpkin blossoms, and I don't expect you to fully understand, but for me, these were not mere plants. Not merely a break from the well-worn routine, which would have been enough. Not an escape from the eyes of Concord, which would have been enough. And not a newfound hobby, which also would have been enough. They were all that and much more. Over the deafening din of the mundane, over the rabble of Concord politics, for a muddling minister, over the drifting apart between Nancy and me, over some 100 other distractions and inactions, over all this, I could see and hear and feel a clarion call of my pumpkin blossoms. A Louis Armstrong solo, a moonshot, the first cry of a child. Hope, man. I mean, holler from the rooftop, hope! The authentic article, colossal, alive, and growing right there in my backyard. And then further down the road, this is when he's starting, his entrepreneurial buddy has talked to him about perhaps joining. So he's sitting, he likes to get out this old beach chair, one of those canvas ones. And he sits low so he can be really close to Schwartz. He likes to cozy up to Schwartz and sort of feel his presence, be able to reach out and pat him. And he says at one point, because of his height, his knees jut up like playground equipment when he's in this chair. And so he's been thinking about the seeds, and he's been penciling in, like, what if there were 1,000 seeds? What if there were 500 seeds? And he's doing all these calculations, and suddenly it dawns on him. But why stop with seeds? The next easy idea was selling big pumpkins for Halloween and giants for businesses and schools who would want an impressive pumpkin display. Of course, there was a market for seeds as a snack food, and as well as pumpkin pies. I dreamed of an ass-kicking assault on the flabby potato, mashed pumpkin instead of mashed potatoes, pumpkin French fries, pumpkin chips, all healthier than the sorry spud, and more. Pumpkin pretzels, Budweiser pumpkin beer for the masses, factory production of pumpkin bread for a better peanut butter and jelly sandwich, pumpkin ice cream, pumpkin flavored breakfast cereal, coffee-infused pumpkin fiber as Mother Nature's perfectly gentle and natural laxative, which also reduces the risks of colon cancer. Study pending. Chocolate-covered pumpkin bars. I scrawled ideas as fast as I could, capitalizing on this ballooning brainstorm, this rare and evanescent flash of inspiration, a moment of brilliant of, dare I say it, genius. There at the hub of this spinning wheel of creativity sat me, John Crackstone, a pioneer of the whole unexplored world of pumpkin benefits beyond just food. This marked my territory, my milieu. Perhaps as a body lotion, a suntan lotion, or a salve against sunburn. Goodbye, aloe vera. Or as a beauty cream for an organic, healthy hint of orange. A natural glow like our 45th president. Perhaps he'd endorse it. As nature's own hair tonic, to give hair a natural bounce and a wonderful smell that enhances the human libido. Study pending. And it gives your hair a wonderful new sheen. That's it. We'll call this miracle product New Sheen. May need to partner with Procter & Gamble for marketing and distribution. Partnership pending. Pumpkins to create plastics, replacing the lowly soybean. Why not use the fibrous bodies or vines for paper making? It saves trees, a more rapidly replaced natural resource, and we can all get to enjoy a fresh-smelling newspaper or a naturally golden-colored toilet paper. Gear up the engine of capitalism and marketing behind the mighty pumpkin, nature's perfect plant for pharmaceuticals, beauty, intestines, and industry. There was really no end. So, poor John Crackstone goes a little manic there, as you see.
I'd say he does that a couple times in the book.
That advertising career came in real handy.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed that you do really well also, besides what you just did, I don't even know what you call that.
Showing off.
Okay. Is your writing of metaphors, which I think is very, very difficult to do well. And I want to read my favorite one in the whole book. This is when he gets to Arizona to see his father, and he sees a flower in the middle of the heat of Arizona, and he says, "So when you saw a small desert flower, it delighted the eye like a joyous defiance of the harsh climate, as splendid as a Russian folk dance blooming in the face of the Soviets' repressive regime. I love that. It was so beautifully written, and there's bunches of those throughout the book. I really enjoy that. So you're going to have to buy the book, read the book to find out what happened with John Crackstone. But let's get some of your questions first, and then come on up.
Greg.
I think some of your pumpkin ideas are really legit.
I did too.
Yeah, they just have to be plausible enough, right?
Maybe get in the pumpkin business.
Yeah. The beer's been done, but not by a macro brew. It's always the micro brews.
Somebody had a question right here.
Well,
Mary?
I know you said the whole, you saw the big pumpkin at the fair up in New England. But when did this pumpkin character, when did that come to you?
Yeah, it was I kind of carried these things. I think it's because I'm a slow thinker, It's like, and I was maybe because I was a late bloomer. Late bloomers are always trying to grow. And so it takes a long time for an idea to incubate with me. I knew that I had to deal with this pumpkin thing. And if you get the short stories, there's a short story in there of my first effort. And that was about 10 years, or 6 years after I saw the pumpkins. And that's called A Pumpkin Summer. But those characters in that short story just wouldn't leave me alone. And they kept, poor Lauren knows I've got like a confetti of little notes all over the house. Scratch a little note here, or tear off a piece of newspaper and write something down, and or wake up at 3 a.m. and jot a few notes, and I keep stacks of them on the corner of my desk, and every so often I go through them all, and what the hell was I thinking? Just throw that one away, and and then they go into a big file, which gets revisited once in a great while, but the ones that really feel sticky, I just carry them around, and then eventually it's like, oh, wait a minute, what about, I have this friend who's this minister who's really struggling, and so he's really kind of breaking. He's thinking about getting out of the ministry, and he kind of hates it, and I'm thinking, that could cause somebody to grow a giant friggin' pumpkin, And so then I start thinking about how to match those things up. And I thought about different characters, different types of people who might have been the pumpkin grower. In fact, I even had a brief chat with a guy who was a great pumpkin grower, who was a mailman. And he has a brief show in here. There's a brief mention of this guy who was a mailman and was the wizard of giant pumpkins in southern New Hampshire. Yeah, Tracy.
Why Schwartz?
Schwartz, thank you. Well, in the book, it's Schwartz because he's named after this sort of notorious Old Testament professor from seminary, who is kind of an old badger. From an authorial side, I chose Schwartz because it's German for dark or black. And so he is kind of, in a way, a representation of the black arts. It's like he's moved very far from as the burgeoning of Schwartz comes about, it sort of pushes God aside. I mean, that's why I love this cover so much, because for this character, the pumpkin is bigger than the church. It's bigger than the town, the community he lives in. And so that's why it's Schwartz. But thank you for the question. Paul?
Who designed the cover?
Yeah, so, yeah, my son Nick, who is in the back of the room. Yeah, so he's designed all three of my book covers, and I think this is the strongest of the three.
Yeah.
And he does too. It's a fun cover, and thank you, Paul.
It just says it like that.
Yeah.
That's the sign of a good piece of art,
Yeah, that's
commercial
right.
art.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, Ken.
John, is there anything about the character that sort of is autobiographical, if that's the word, about you? In other words, was there anything in him that as you kind of pursued your own career, you sort of identified with?
Yeah, in some ways, there are several characters here that I really love, and some of them are pulled from, some of them are amalgams of people that I've known over the years, and I think the thing it's not autobiographical. I'm not a minister, I never grew a pumpkin, I'm not 7 feet tall, but I have worked with the wrong people in the wrong place, and I know that struggle, and I know the weight of carrying that, and I know too, although my situation was different, there was a different kind of handcuffs that made me stay at that job longer than I wanted to, with ultimately positive results. But so I could identify with, I think in this way, I took some of those feelings and I poured them into this, and it's interesting. I studied theater for a while, and there's a lot of character making that is tied to acting in a way. As you try to go deep on the character, what are their motivations? What are they thinking about? How do they feel? How do they express these emotions? I just saw Jeanette Walls was here a few weeks ago, and she expressed that very idea. She said that someone had given her advice. Someone asked her what the best writing advice she'd ever gotten was, and she said it was to take an acting class. And then after she talked about it a few seconds, she said, but I have to admit, I've never taken an acting class. So that was interesting, But she did say that she had hung out with the actors when they shot her movie, her book to a movie of The Glass Castle. Yeah, Beth.
Well, I love the way that you made him just so human. We think of ministers as having to be, these sort of models on a pedestal, and that they don't really go through the same things as the rest of us. So I love the scene where he was sitting in the middle of the night with his pumpkins, and Carol comes out and takes off her clothes and dives into the pool, and he's just can't breathe for, watching this scene.
Yes. So the object of his infatuation, that's the night that he goes out, late at night. It's 2 a.m. when he goes out to make the final cut of the pumpkins in the patch. And while he's out there heaving and chopping and being ruthless, he hears a door shut next door, and he looks up, and there's Carol. And she's wearing a white robe, and she walks down to the pool, and she does a beautiful dancer's move and sweeps her foot through the water to test the temperature. And then she walks back, and she drops her white robe and takes her nightgown over her head, and he's like, oh. And he almost before he realizes it, he's hiding behind Schwartz, And so he's all packed down, and at the sight of her, he can just barely resist licking the surface of Schwartz's skin, and she swims a couple laps, and she gets out of the pool, and he's aching for more illumination. But she picks up she puts her robe on, and she picks up her nightgown and walks back inside. And he's, again, one of his fantasy moments, he said, did she do that for me?
Yeah.
She had looked in my direction. Yes. Beth has obviously read the book. Yeah. Yeah, Kip.
As a minister, does he believe in God? What's his relationship with God?
Yes.
Higher power. It seems like that's a contradiction with a lot of clergy people.
Yeah, it is, I think. And
Conflict.
yeah, he does believe, but it's certainly tested, and he says it's tested. And at one point, he's saying, I don't believe anymore, but he circles back to it. But it's really interesting in the research that I was doing and reading about ministers. I mean, they're a sad lot. They really are. I mean, it's a huge number of them who feel like it's well over half, like 70% believe that their role as a minister is bad for their family. And that, they suffer from this job, and they carry that burden. And many, a lot of them, the divorce rate is in the mid-60s percentile-wise, considerably higher than the population at large. So there's a lot of strain in the job. And a lot of that, as Beth was saying, a lot of that sort of sense of they're perfect, And I reveal here, John Crackstone is clearly very flawed, but we're all flawed, and these ministers suffer that greatly because they feel scrutinized at every turn.
Any other questions? Come on up.
Yeah. So, thank you.
You can.
Right. Before anybody gets up, or David's already got it, Paul wanted to do a photo of
Oh, and also.
me and y'all.